Bruno's heart was barely beating. Sandra Bullock screamed, but no one moved. How far would you go to save a life? She pushed open the door to the vet clinic. Heads turned. A few people whispered. Others eyed her up and down, but no one reacted. No one even asked, "What happened?" "Please," Sandra cried out, her voice raw, her breath uneven. "This dog is dying. Help him." The vet behind the desk didn't look at the dog. He looked at her, at the mud-stained pants, the soaked shirt, the exhaustion in her eyes. He didn't recognize her. He took a sip of his coffee, shrugged, and said a single word, "Payment." Sandra's blood turned cold. Her eyelids fluttered. The dog in her arms was barely clinging to life, and that was the first thing he had to say. "What?" Sandra whispered, almost breathless. The vet sighed, bored, and repeated himself. Clinic policy. Payment first, treatment second. Something inside Sandra snapped. Her breath came in uneven gasps. Had she heard him right? The tiny body in her arms was trembling, gasping for air, holding on to her for dear life. But this man, looking straight at her, was saying, "If you don't have the money, I don't have the time." The people in the waiting room just watched. Then someone laughed. "That dog won't last long." A woman whispered to the man beside her, "We should call the cops. She looks unstable." Sandra's face went blank. What? What was dangerous? That she had fought through the rain to save a life? "This dog is dying," Sandra said, her voice shaking but firm. "I will do whatever it takes, but please, help him." The vet leaned back in his chair. His eyes were empty, his voice indifferent. "We're not a charity." A storm rose inside her. She clutched Bruno tighter, fighting to contain the fire growing in her chest, and then the trembling stopped. Sandra's breath hitched. The little body in her arms went still. "No, no, no," she whispered. Her hands shook as she gently placed Bruno on the floor, willing him to breathe, but his eyes stared into nothing. "Somebody, help." Sandra's scream echoed through the clinic. The vet rolled his eyes. Annoyed, he muttered, "Like I said, if you don't have them on—" Sandra's head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto his. And something had changed. The fear was gone. Only sharp, unshakable determination remained. Just as she was about to fight back, a chair scraped against the floor. Everyone turned. A middle-aged woman shot to her feet. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "If you won't help, then I will." The clinic froze. The same people who had been mocking Sandra were now staring at her and at the woman. The woman stepped closer. Her voice softened. "There's another clinic nearby. I can take you there." Sandra hesitated. Out of all these people, only one had stepped forward. Then, without a second thought, she scooped Bruno back into her arms. "Let's go, now!" As they rushed toward the door, the vet's cold voice followed them. "You're wasting your time. That dog is already dead." Sandra's steps halted. Had he really said that? Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes met his. But she didn't say a word, because some things don't need words. Some things are answered with actions. The car sped down the rain-slicked road. Streetlights flickered against the wet glass, casting shaky shadows inside. In the back seat, Sandra Bullock clutched Bruno against her chest. The small body was cold, his breathing unsteady. The woman, gripping the steering wheel, stole a glance at her. "He's going to be okay, right?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. Sandra took a deep breath. She couldn't promise that. But she had no choice. With unwavering determination, she spoke. "He will be. He has to be." She gently stroked Bruno's head. "Hold on, little buddy. We're almost there." As the car sped forward, Sandra caught her reflection in the window. Tired, soaked, drained. But it wasn't just the exhaustion of the night. It was the exhaustion of fighting against indifference, the events of the past hour replayed in her mind. the vet's cold, detached stare, the murmurs of the waiting room, the way no one lifted a finger to help. But then, one person. Sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference. The driver eyed Sandra carefully through the rearview mirror. Her brows furrowed slightly. "I feel like I know you," she said, hesitant yet curious. "Are you Sandra Bullock?" Sandra barely lifted her head. Her eyes remained on Bruno. "It doesn't matter," she murmured. "Right now, the only thing that matters is Bruno." But the woman kept looking at her through the mirror, her expression shifting. "I knew it," she gasped. "You're really Sandra Bullock." A moment of silence filled the car. Sandra took a deep breath but didn't respond. Tonight, who she was didn't matter. The woman, still in shock, shook her head. "Oh, my God! Those people at the clinic, the ones who judged you, looked down on you." Sandra closed her eyes. Yes, they had dismissed her just by looking at her. If they had known who she was, they would have treated her differently, but that shouldn't have mattered. "People judge based on appearances," Sandra said quietly, "but what matters is who you really are." The woman nodded slowly. "You know what?" she said. "I think what you did tonight is bigger than any movie you've ever been in." Sandra gave a small smile, but her heart remained heavy. Bruno's breathing was still shallow. Then the woman suddenly turned the wheel. "We're here, the clinic. Let's go." Sandra threw open the door. Bruno's body was still warm, but so weak. Tonight, it wasn't just a dog's life at stake. Tonight, people's faith in humanity was being tested. Sandra pushed through the clinic doors. Warm air and the sharp scent of disinfectant clashed with the cold, rainy night outside. Behind the reception desk, a young woman's eyes widened as she recognized her. "Oh, my God, you're Sandra Bullock!" Heads turned. Whispers filled the room. Unlike the people from earlier, these ones suddenly cared. But Sandra didn't. She only cared about Bruno. "My dog is in bad shape. Please, I need help, now!" Her desperation cut through the room. A veterinary technician rushed forward. "What happened? Is he injured?" Sandra hesitated, just for a second. "He's not my dog," she said softly. But somehow he was. Her heart clenched as she laid Bruno on the stretcher. "Please, save him." The vet's eyes flicked from Bruno to Sandra. His expression grew serious. "Now, it's up to us." Sandra stepped back. The doors swung shut, and for the first time that night, she didn't know what to do. The doors closed, but the storm inside Sandra didn't. Bruno's trembling body was burned into her mind. Now, everything was happening behind that wall, beyond her reach, and all she could do was wait. Sandra took a deep breath, but it wasn't enough. All night she had fought, not just for Bruno, but against the world itself. First, the vet's cold indifference, then the people's mocking stares, and now Bruno's fragile body hanging between life and death. Beside her, the woman who had helped her watched in silence. "He's going to be okay. I believe it." There was confidence in her voice. Sandra shook her head. "I wish believing was enough." Her voice was cracked, fragile. Just then, the door swung open. A vet technician stood before them, tired but steady. "The seizures are under control, but—" She hesitated. Sandra's heart clenched. But what? The technician took a breath. "Bruno can't be left alone. He'll need constant care and medication, but more than anything, he needs a safe, loving home." Sandra's eyes narrowed. The words echoed in her mind. Then, without hesitation, without a single moment of doubt, she answered. "What do I have to do?" Bruno whimpered softly. Sandra immediately knelt beside him, stroking his tiny head. "Hey, little buddy, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." His tail twitched, weak but alive. The vet technician handed Sandra a stack of paperwork. "That's it. Bruno is officially yours." Sandra signed her name. Then, slowly, she set the pen down, and in that moment, she realized something. Bruno wasn't just a rescued animal. He was family. Just then, someone stepped through the clinic doors. The room fell silent. Sandra looked up. It was him, the vet from before, the man who had refused to help, the man who had turned her away. He hesitated. His eyes met hers. There was a flicker of something, guilt maybe, but Sandra didn't look away. He swallowed hard, then muttered, "I'm sorry." Sandra tilted her head slightly. Her face was unreadable, calm but firm. Apologies don't fix everything. Her voice was steady, carrying an unspoken weight. If we had lost Bruno tonight, your apology wouldn't have meant a thing. The vet looked away, because she was right. Sandra lifted Bruno into her arms and turned toward the door. But before stepping out, she glanced over her shoulder and whispered, "Compassion should never come with a price tag." And that night, Sandra Bullock didn't just save a dog. She changed the way people saw the world. 1 week later, the sun bathed Sandra's backyard in golden light. Bruno nestled against her, safe and warm. Sandra ran her fingers through his soft fur. "I made you a promise, remember?" Bruno wagged his tail. He was home. He was safe. Sandra took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. She would never forget that night. But more importantly, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Because love isn't about status, it's about the heart. What about you? How did this story make you feel? Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Or stopped from helping someone in need? Kindness should never be measured by money or fame. Real character is revealed in the hardest moments. If you believe compassion shouldn't have a price, help this message reach more people. Subscribe now and share this story to spread the power of kindness.